What if the stars you see at night, the rustling leaves in a forest, even the relentless march of time itself, weren't just out there, but were actually shaped in some fundamental way by your own awareness?
Hmm,
Sounds like the plot of a mind-bending movie, right? But the strange world of quantum physics, as we'll explore today, kind of hints at precisely that.
it really does. And we have before us a fascinating collection of ideas today, drawing from, well, the often counterintuitive findings of quantum mechanics,
Hmm.
the insightful philosophy of Alan Watts, and even echoes in various spiritual traditions.
Right.
Our goal in this deep dive, really, is to try and unravel whether our consciousness actively participates in creating the reality we experience, or if it's maybe more like a ripple within a much grander cosmic current.
Okay.
And definitely stick with us until the very end, because there's a surprising connection that Watts draws between science and the profound mysteries of existence that might just transform how you understand the world around you.
Absolutely. Alan Watts. I like how you put it, maybe a poet of the cosmos. He had this remarkable ability to bridge Eastern wisdom with modern Western thought.
He really did.
And one of his core ideas, a thread we'll be following today, was simply this: the way to become one with the universe is to trust it.
And this brings us smack into a central question we'll be grappling with. Could our consciousness, as Watts seems to suggest, actually be a co-creator of this vast cosmos? To begin exploring this, I think we really need to touch upon the truly mind-bending realm of quantum mechanics.
Quantum physics, yes. A field just brimming with concepts that can make your head spin like superposition, the idea that a particle can exist in multiple states simultaneously.
Right, superposition.
And entanglement, where distant particles seem linked in ways that just defy our understanding of space and time.
Exactly. And these aren't just abstract theories, they really challenge our everyday, solid view of reality.
Totally.
And in a curious way, they seem to resonate with Watt's concept of the inseparable identity of selves and other.
Yeah, that connection is fascinating.
Indeed. And we can't overlook David Bohm's cosmic hologram theory either, which proposes that the universe at a fundamental level is this interconnected whole, where each part kind of contains information about the entirety. This resonates really powerfully with Watts' philosophy of interconnectedness.
But this leads us to a crucial point of tension, doesn't it? Is our consciousness like a cosmic artist, actively shaping the universe with each observation? Or is it more like part of a much larger, flowing masterpiece, maybe, as Watts might argue?
That's the core of it.
That's what we're diving into.
Precisely. Our exploration today will weave together the discoveries of quantum physics, the profound insights of Watts, and we'll even touch on meditative practices that invite us to perhaps let go and flow with the rhythm of the cosmos.
Okay, so prepare to question some of the fundamental assumptions you hold about reality.
Definitely.
Okay, let's unpack this maybe by starting with Alan Watts himself. What makes his perspective so crucial for this conversation?
Well, Watts possessed this really rare gift for taking complex Eastern philosophies, things like Taoism and Zen, and making them accessible and relevant to a Western audience.
Right.
His quote, "The way to become one with the universe is to trust it," as we mentioned. It acts as a surprisingly effective bridge to many of the mysteries we encounter in quantum physics.
A bridge, yeah.
Think of it as a different lens, maybe, through which to view these strange phenomena.
That makes sense. He didn't see reality as something static that we try to control, but more as a living process, right? He even had that parable of the balsa wood raft.
Exactly. Watts used that image of the raft to illustrate how, by trusting the course of nature, everything sort of cooperated with the person on it. We can draw a direct parallel here to consciousness and the observer effect in quantum physics. Could it be that when we observe quantum particles, our consciousness is simply flowing with this natural process rather than imposing a specific outcome?
Interesting. And he spoke a lot about this idea that we and the universe aren't separate entities.
Yes, absolutely. He said, the more you trust it as another, the more you realize the inseparable identity of self and other.
Right.
This perspective of unity finds a powerful echo in Bohm's holographic universe idea, suggesting that the seemingly separate self is actually deeply intertwined with the fabric of reality. This raises really profound implications about the nature of consciousness itself.
And there was that phrase of his about decisions, how we don't really know where they come from, they just pop up like hiccups. How does that fit in?
Well, that spontaneity Watts describes could be related to the seemingly unpredictable nature of quantum events. If our own decisions feel like they arise from nowhere, maybe the behavior of quantum particles isn't so random after all, but part of a larger flow that our consciousness, on some level, understands. It suggests this deeper, less controlled relationship with reality.
So, in a way, Watts acts as a guide for understanding how our mind shapes the world, not through forceful control, but through surrender, through trusting this underlying current.
Precisely. He invites us to explore the mystery of consciousness with an attitude of openness and trust, rather than trying to impose some definitive explanation.
Now let's turn to what fascinates so many, the intriguing world of quantum physics. What makes this field so crucial to our discussion?
Well, quantum physics fundamentally invites us to question our most basic assumptions about the nature of reality. And the double slit experiment is probably the classic example of this invitation.
Ah, yes, that experiment where electrons seem to behave in completely different ways depending on whether they're being watched or not. It's wild.
It is wild, exactly. When electrons are fired at a barrier with two slits and are not observed as they pass through, they behave like waves, creating an interference pattern on the screen behind.
Right, the wave pattern.
It's as if they went through both slits at the same time. But the moment we try to observe which slit each electron goes through, they mysteriously start behaving like individual particles, creating a completely different pattern, just two distinct bands. This discovery from the early 20th century truly shook the foundations of science. It suggested that the very act of observation by a conscious observer might play a role in what manifests as reality.
It's as if the simple act of looking changes the fundamental nature of what's being looked at.
That's what it seems like.
So the key takeaway here isn't just that observation changes things, but that reality itself might be fundamentally participatory, challenging our ingrained idea of a separate, objective world.
Precisely. And it doesn't stop there. We have other equally mind-bending quantum concepts, such as entanglement.
Right, entanglement.
Where two particles can become linked in such a way that the state of one instantaneously influences the state of the other, no matter how far apart they are.
Instantaneously.
Instantaneously. It defies our traditional understanding of space and time.
It sounds like something out of science fiction. And where does David Bohm fit into all of this?
Bohm. Well, Bohm took these quantum weirdnesses a step further, proposing his theory of the implicate order.
Implicate order.
He suggested that the universe, at a more fundamental level, is an interconnected whole, like a hologram, where every part contains information about the entire system.
A hologram.
This vision resonates deeply with Watt's idea that the universe is an endless mystery to itself.
So we come back to that central portion then. If our consciousness truly shapes what we perceive, are we the creators of this reality, or merely parts within a much larger cosmic play, as maybe Watts might suggest?
Exactly. And before we delve deeper into the science and spirituality, it's worth considering Watt's provocative idea. What if the universe is, as he proposes, a cosmic game where consciousness is simultaneously the player and the very board upon which the game is played?
In this deep dive we're calling Quantum Soul, our objective is precisely that: to investigate the frontiers where science, spirituality, and mystery intersect. And quantum physics, with its strange dance of particles under the gaze of consciousness, seems like the perfect stage for this exploration.
It really does. Science offers us the experiments, like the double slit, and the theories, like Bohm's, that hint at this influence of mind on reality.
Right.
Spirituality, guided by the wisdom of Watts and age-old traditions like Taoism and Vedanta, invites us to trust this unified cosmic flow.
And mystery.
Well, mystery is the engine of our curiosity, constantly prompting us to ask, does consciousness truly create reality, or does it merely reflect the dance of the cosmos?
And our journey here will follow exactly those pillars, won't it?
That's the plan.
Starting with the strangeness of quantum physics, moving through the philosophy of Alan Watts, seeing how this compares with other spiritual traditions, analyzing what the science of consciousness itself has to say, and even touching on meditative practices to help us maybe tune into this universal flow.
Exactly, and stick with us until the end, because the way Watts manages to weave all these threads together into a coherent and transformative view of reality is truly quite surprising.
The universe, with its spiraling galaxies and vibrating atoms, seems so solid, so predictable, until we look closely.
In the quantum realm, the rules of our everyday experience simply seem to cease to apply. Particles seem to exist in multiple states at once, instantaneous connections defy the laws of space, and consciousness. Well, consciousness appears to have the capacity to decide what, in fact, is real.
It's remarkable. Quantum physics, through experiments like the double slit, truly leads us to consider that the mind isn't just a passive observer of reality, but an active participant in its very formation.
An active participant.
And Alan Watts, with his insight that the universe is an endless mystery to itself, perhaps saw this quantum world as a kind of cosmic dance, where consciousness and the universe are inseparable partners.
But what does science actually tell us about all of this? And how do these findings resonate with the trust that Watts placed in this universal flow? That's the big question, isn't it?
It really is, exactly. To even begin to address this central question, does consciousness create reality? We need to dive headfirst into quantum mechanics, a field that has revolutionized our understanding of the cosmos.
From the puzzling double-slit experiment, which shows particles changing their behavior under the gaze of the mind, to David Bohm's fascinating cosmic hologram theory, where everything is interconnected at a deep level, quantum physics challenges our very idea of a fixed and immutable world.
And these ideas, in a way, find an echo in Watts' philosophy, which saw our individual selves and the universe as mere expressions of the same fundamental flow.
Exactly. So prepare to explore with us concepts like superposition, entanglement, and the crucial role of the observer.
Okay.
If consciousness truly have this capacity to shape reality, then what are we really? We'll try to uncover this, guided by that sense of mystery that Watts himself so celebrated.
At the heart of quantum physics lies the double-slit experiment, one of the most fascinating and, I confess, slightly bizarre experiments in science.
It is bizarre.
First performed in the early 20th century, it reveals the rather peculiar behavior of subatomic particles, like electrons.
Right. Imagine firing electrons, one by one, towards a barrier with two very narrow slits. If no one is observing these electrons as they pass through the slits, what happens on the screen behind the barrier?
Ah, they create an interference pattern, right? As if they were waves passing through both slits simultaneously and interfering with each other, like ripples in water.
Exactly. That's the wave behavior. This suggests that, at a fundamental level, these particles aren't exactly localized things, but more like waves of probability, existing in multiple potential states at the same time, we call superposition.
Superposition, okay.
But things get really strange when we place a detector to try and observe which slit each electron passes through.
Then the pattern changes completely. The electrons suddenly start behaving like individual particles, passing through one slit or the other, and form just two distinct bands on the screen, as if they had chosen a single path. It's nuts.
It is nuts, exactly. This phenomenon, known as the collapse of the wave function, suggests that the very act of observation, or we could say our consciousness, somehow determines the state in which the particle manifests.
Determines the state.
And things get even more intriguing with an experiment conducted in 2007 at the University of Vienna.
Oh, what happened there?
Well, they apparently made an observation after the electron had already passed through the slits.
After.
Even so, the pattern on the screen changed, as if the decision of consciousness had reached back in time, altering the electron's behavior in the past.
Oh, retrocausal.
It hints at it. These results truly challenge our linear understanding of cause and effect, and hint that the mind might play a much more active role in the co-creation of reality than we typically imagine.
That's almost unbelievable. And how might Alan Watts have viewed all of this?
Well, with his characteristic humor, Watts would probably say something like, "You don't know where your decisions come from, they pop up like hiccups." For him, the double-slit experiment might just be a reflection of this fundamental cosmic dance, where consciousness and reality are ultimately one and the same.
It's as if the universe is playing hide and seek with us.
Exactly, or peekaboo. And the impact of this experiment goes far beyond the physics laboratory. Philosophers like John Wheeler went so far as to propose the idea of a participatory universe, where consciousness is essential for the very existence of the cosmos.
A participatory universe.
What does all this really mean for our understanding of the world? Before we explore other quantum ideas, let's delve into the theory of David Bohm, which offers us an even more connected perspective, and one that resonates deeply with Watts' philosophy of unity.
David Bohm, right, a visionary physicist of the 20th century. He established this profound connection between physics and philosophy, and his theory of the implicate order seems to speak directly to the ideas of Alan Watts.
Exactly. In his seminal book, Wholeness in the Implicate Order, published back in 1980, Bohm proposes that the universe, at its most fundamental level, isn't a collection of separate parts, but rather an undivided wholeness, much like a hologram.
A hologram? How so? Like on a credit card?
Sort of, but think bigger. Imagine a photographic hologram. If you cut it into smaller pieces, each piece still contains the entire image of the original object, just maybe with lower resolution.
Okay, I see.
Bohm used this analogy to describe the universe. In the implicate order, the visible reality, which he called the explicate order, is just a projection, an unfolding from a deeper level of interconnectedness, where everything is intrinsically linked.
So everything.
A subatomic particle, a distant galaxy, even our own consciousness would be different expressions of this same underlying totality.
So everything would be connected at a level we can't even directly perceive.
Exactly. And this idea resonates really strongly with Watt's view that the more you trust it as another, the more you realize the inseparable identity of self and other.
Write that quote again.
For Bohm, consciousness wouldn't be something separate from material reality, but an active part of this continuous process of unfolding the implicate order into visible phenomena, such as the very collapse of the wave function in the double-slit experiment.
And how does quantum entanglement fit into this view, that spooky action stuff?
Bohm saw quantum entanglement, that mysterious link between distant particles, as basically evidence of this deeper interconnectedness. Experiments like Alain Aspects back in 1982 confirmed this phenomenon, showing that particles separated by vast distances could instantaneously influence each other, as if they were a single entity.
Incredible. And what might Alan Watts have said about all of this?
Watts, with his perspective influenced by Taoism, would likely have seen entanglement as a manifestation of the great Tao in action, that universal flow that permeates everything. He said the great Tao flows everywhere.
Flows everywhere.
But quantum physics offers us even more concepts that expand this view of an interconnected and fluid reality.
Okay, so beyond the double-slit experiment and Bohm's implicate order, quantum physics presents us with other concepts that truly challenge our intuition about how the world works.
Yes, let's just quickly revisit superposition, that idea that a particle can exist in multiple states or locations simultaneously until it is observed.
Right.
Recent experiments with ultra-cold atoms continue to demonstrate this fluid nature of reality at the quantum level.
Yeah.
And Alan Watts had an interesting way of looking at this, comparing it to biological evolution and the delegation of authority.
Oh, yeah.
He said, this is the way biological evolution goes on, constant delegation of authority. Perhaps consciousness, in a way, delegates the specific form that reality takes at the moment of observation.
That's an intriguing analogy. And what about quantum entanglement, which we've already mentioned, that instant connection?
Well, it implies a non-local connection between particles, challenging the very notion of space and time. In 2015, researchers in the Netherlands conducted an experiment that confirmed entanglement with a very high level of certainty, reinforcing the idea of a fundamentally interconnected universe.
So it's pretty solid now.
Seems so. Watts saw this interconnectedness as a manifestation of synergy. Synergy is the intelligence of a highly complex system, where consciousness participates in a much larger whole.
Synergy and that idea of non-locality, of correlations without an apparent physical cause?
Exactly. The EPR paradox, proposed by Einstein and his colleagues, raised this very question of spooky action at a distance, challenging the idea that interactions need to be local.
Right, Einstein didn't like it.
No, he didn't. But all these concepts together suggest a reality that is much less solid and defined than we perceive in our everyday lives, almost like a dream that is shaped by the mind.
So quantum physics is showing us a universe that's far more malleable and mysterious than we ever imagined.
Precisely. And now, maybe let's explore some of the philosophical implications of these discoveries before we loop back and connect it all with Alan Watts' unique perspective.
Okay, because quantum physics isn't just a branch of science, is it? It represents a true philosophical revolution in our understanding of the universe.
Without a doubt. It fundamentally challenges classical materialism, that view that the universe is basically composed of separate little bits interacting mechanically.
Right, the billiard ball universe.
Exactly. Instead, quantum physics proposes a dynamic and intrinsically interconnected cosmos. The role of the observer in the double-slit experiment, for example, suggests that consciousness isn't a mere passive spectator, but an active agent in the manifestation of reality.
And Bohm's theory, with this idea of a holographic universe, seems to align perfectly with Watts' view that the universe is an endless mystery to itself.
Exactly. And we can't ignore the fact that these scientific ideas find surprising parallels in various spiritual traditions that emphasize the fundamental unity between mind and cosmos.
That's a key part of this.
It is. If consciousness truly has this capacity to shape reality, the implications are profound. Our choices, our intentions, even our meditative practices could have a much greater impact on the world than we realize.
This brings us back to that trust that Watts so often spoke of. The way to become one with the universe is to trust it.
Exactly. But the question that remains is, are we sovereign creators of our reality, Or are we just parts of a much larger cosmic flow, as Watts seems to suggest?
The big question.
Quantum physics, it's important to remember, doesn't offer definitive answers to these questions, but it certainly opens doors to a realm of mystery and possibilities that were previously unimaginable.
So before we delve deeper into Watt's philosophy of unity and trust, to better understand the role of consciousness in this cosmic dance, this question lingers. What would he say about particles that seem to know they are being observed?
Well, Alan Watts' philosophy, with his emphasis on unity and the universal flow, offers us a fascinating perspective for understanding this potential co-creation of reality that quantum physics seems to hint at.
Yes, because if consciousness truly shapes reality, like the double-slit experiment suggests, then what is our role in this process? Is it an act of conscious will, of control, or something much more subtle?
Watts, with that mystical wisdom that characterized him and his deep trust in the cosmic flow, would likely say something like, "The great Tao flows everywhere."
The Tao.
For him, consciousness isn't an isolated and separate force, but an intrinsic part of this interconnected cosmos, where the individual and the universe are ultimately expressions of the same fundamental process.
And this vision of unity and flow, which he so often advocated, finds parallels in both David Bohm's cosmic hologram theory and the very strangeness of quantum physics.
Exactly. But the question that arises is, how does Watts' philosophy actually illuminate the role of our consciousness in this potential process of shaping reality? He invites us to trust, to embrace the not knowing, and to recognize this fundamental cosmic synergy ideas that resonate with the possibility of the mind influencing the world in ways that modern science is only beginning to grasp.
So prepare to dive deeper into this trust, this unity, and this sense of mystery that permeates Watts' philosophy, always asking ourselves, if consciousness truly creates reality, how can we learn to flow with this power in a more conscious and harmonious way?
At the heart of Watts' philosophy lies this fundamental trust in the universe, a kind of radical surrender to this constantly moving cosmic process. He wrote, "The way to become one with the universe is to trust it."
Trust it.
For Watts, the universe isn't a machine that needs to be controlled, but a living intelligence that operates spontaneously, without the need for constant conscious intervention on our part, just like our own nervous system regulates our breathing, or wakes us up in the morning without us having to think about it.
It's as if he's saying that there's an inherent wisdom in the universe that's far greater than our rational understanding.
Exactly. And this trust is key to understanding the role of consciousness within the framework of quantum physics. In the double-slit experiment, for instance, the act of observation seems to collapse reality into a definite state. But Watts would argue that this act of observation isn't a deliberate effort, but a spontaneous flow that arises within this larger cosmic process. He even used that amusing analogy. You don't know where your decisions come from. They pop up like hiccups.
Interesting. So when we talk about co-creating reality, it wouldn't be a matter of trying to actively control every detail, like micromanaging the universe.
Exactly. Precisely. In quantum physics, consciousness seems to have this capacity to influence the state of particles. But trying to force this influence, to exert excessive control, can generate anxiety and frustration. As he illustrated in that parable of the overworked laborer, decision after decision, it was driving him crazy.
Right, the need to control everything.
Instead, Watts suggests we loosen the reins, trust the flow. The principle is that any time you voluntarily let up control, you have an access of power.
It's almost paradoxical, isn't it? That by letting go of control, we actually gain more power, or access power.
Exactly. If consciousness truly shapes reality, perhaps it does so most effectively when we trust this flow, just like the man on the balsa-wood raft. Everything cooperated with him because he flowed with the course of nature.
Flowed with it.
For Watts, consciousness co-creates reality by aligning itself with this universal flow, rather than trying to dominate it.
And this trust isn't just an abstract idea, right? He saw our bodies and minds as extensions of this universe.
Exactly. Watts viewed the body and mind as integral parts of the cosmos, operating in constant synergy. And quantum physics, with its concepts of superposition and entanglement, seems to suggest that the universe itself is fundamentally synergistic, a vast and interconnected system where consciousness plays a role perhaps much more integrated than we imagine.
So how does this unity between self and universe actually manifest in our experience?
Well, that's the next point we need to explore in Watts' philosophy.
Alan Watts' vision of unity is truly central to connecting our experience of consciousness with the discoveries of quantum physics.
Yes, definitely, he wrote. The more you trust it as another, the more you realize the inseparable identity of self and other. For Watts, the separation we typically feel between ourselves and the rest of the universe is largely an illusion.
An illusion.
We are fundamentally expressions of this same cosmic process, much like different waves that arise and disappear on the surface of the same ocean.
And this idea resonates strongly with David Bohm's theory of the implicate order, where each part of the universe contains information about the whole.
Exactly. And also with the phenomenon of quantum entanglement, which demonstrates these instantaneous connections between particles that are separated by vast distances. If our consciousness truly has this capacity to shape reality, Watts would argue that it does so not as an isolated entity, but as the universe itself shaping itself.
That makes sense. And how might he interpret the double slit experiment from this perspective of unity?
Well, for Watts, when we observe a particle and it chooses a specific state, this choice wouldn't be an isolated act of the individual observer, but a cosmic event that's part of this great Tao, this universal flow that permeates all things.
Part of the flow.
He even used the metaphor of biological evolution. This is the way biological evolution goes on, constant delegation of authority. Perhaps our consciousness, in collapsing the wave function, is simply delegating the manifestation of reality at a particular moment as part of this larger, more vast system.
So this perspective of unity kind of dissolves this duality between the creator and the creation.
Exactly. It suggests that we co-create reality precisely because we are that reality at a fundamental level. And this view also has profound spiritual implications, doesn't it?
For sure.
Watts, with his inspiration from Taoism and Zen, saw this separation between self and other as one of the main sources of our suffering. And quantum physics, with its non-locality, in a way reinforces this idea that the universe operates as an interconnected whole.
But how can we truly embrace this unity without falling into the trap of trying to explain it rationally?
That's where that idea of not knowing that Watts so appreciated comes in, doesn't it?
The not knowing.
Exactly. Watts celebrated not knowing, not as ignorance, but as an act of profound wisdom. He wrote, "I don't know is the same thing as I love. I let go. I don't try to hold on to it."
Wow.
Inspired by Taoism, where the ultimate Tao is undefinable, and Christian mysticism, where the divine is often found in the darkness of mystery, Watts invites us to embrace the unknown. And this principle fits perfectly with quantum physics, where the behavior of particles defies our everyday logic, and the very nature of consciousness remains a deep enigma.
So perhaps the question, does consciousness create reality, is less important than simply learning to flow with this mystery.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In practice, this not knowing can be incredibly liberating. In the double slit experiment, for instance, trying to understand why observation changes the particle's behavior can lead to frustration and overly simplistic explanations. Watts would say something like, "You make a snap judgment." Instead of forcing a definitive explanation, he suggests we trust the process, the inherent intelligence of the universe, just as he described in his vision of synergy. Synergy is the intelligence of a highly complex system.
Synergy again.
Consciousness, in shaping reality, if it does, operates in a spontaneous and intuitive way, almost like those decisions that simply pop up like hiccups. And this surrender to mystery finds an echo in various spiritual traditions that teach us to dissolve the ego through meditation, allowing our minds to connect more directly with the flow of the cosmos.
And this not knowing also creates a bridge between quantum science and spirituality.
Exactly. Watts saw the universe as an endless mystery to itself, and the very inability of science to completely explain the nature of consciousness would be, for him, not a problem to be solved, but an opportunity for love and acceptance of this fundamental mystery.
So how does this philosophy of Watts, rooted in ancient wisdoms, apply to our modern era, where quantum physics is redefining our understanding of reality at a fundamental level?
That's a great question, because at first glance, Eastern wisdom and modern science might seem to be in opposing camps.
Yeah, they can seem that way.
Yes, but Watts' philosophy, while deeply connected to ancient traditions, demonstrates a surprising relevance to the quantum age. He criticized our Western obsession with control and predictability, as he so well illustrated in that parable of the overworked laborer.
Right, always needing answers, needing control.
And quantum physics, with its fluid nature and its intrinsic uncertainties, in a way challenges this controlling mindset, suggesting that reality is much more of a dynamic process than a collection of fixed objects.
So trying to prove that consciousness creates reality would, in a way, be a manifestation of this need for control.
Exactly. And Watts proposes a very different approach.
Huh.
Radical trust. He said, the more you let go, the more you realize.
Let go.
This surrender, this openness to mystery, might be the key to truly co-creating with the universe in a more harmonious and effective way. Watts even envisioned a practical utopia based on this mutual trust, replacing paranoia and fear with collaboration.
A practical utopia. Interesting.
And in a world where quantum technologies are beginning to emerge, like quantum computers, this vision of synergy and interconnectedness becomes more relevant than ever. He would argue that our consciousness, in interacting with the cosmos at a fundamental level, participates in a much larger and more intelligent system, much like Bohm's hologram theory suggests.
And how does Watts' philosophy compare with other spiritual traditions that also speak of this fundamental unity in this cosmic flow?
That's an excellent question. Before we delve into those connections, we need to understand how Taoism, Vedanta, and other age-old spiritual traditions already addressed concepts that, in a way, echo the discoveries of quantum physics and Watts' own vision.
Okay.
Let's dive into that fascinating terrain, always keeping this sense of cosmic mystery as our guide.
Quantum physics presents us with an intriguing enigma. Could consciousness be the key to shaping reality, deciding the behavior of particles, and, who knows, perhaps even the fundamental structure of the cosmos? Alan Watts, with his profound trust in the universal flow, offers us a mystical perspective to explore this question. He wrote, "The great Tao flows everywhere." For him, consciousness isn't an isolated force, but an integral part of an interconnected cosmos where the individual self and the universe are ultimately expressions of the same fundamental process.
Exactly. And this vision of unity and flow, which Watts so eloquently championed, finds surprising parallels not only in David Bohm's cosmic hologram theory, but also in age-old spiritual traditions like Taoism and Vedanta, which have for centuries spoken of a reality where mind and the all are one.
If consciousness truly has this capacity to create reality, as quantum physics seems to indicate, then what do these spiritual traditions have to teach us about this power?
Well, from Taoism, with its emphasis on the undefinable flow of the Tao, to Vedanta, which proclaims the essential unity between the Atman, the individual soul, and Brahman, the ultimate reality, these spiritual practices suggest that consciousness becomes a co-creator by surrendering to this cosmic flow.
Super.
An idea that Watts would certainly celebrate with his famous phrase, "The way to become one with the universe is to trust it."
So are these spiritual traditions like ancient versions of modern science, or do they offer us an even deeper and more comprehensive understanding of this relationship between consciousness and reality?
That's a crucial question. In this section, we'll explore these fascinating parallels that span centuries, using Watts' philosophy as a conceptual bridge between science and spirituality.
Okay.
We'll ask ourselves whether consciousness is truly the key to the universe, or if it's simply a reflection of its cosmic dance. Prepare for a journey that unites ancient wisdom with the latest discoveries of physics, always guided by that sense of mystery that permeates both science and spirituality.
Taoism, with its profound emphasis on the Tao as the fundamental principle and universal flow of existence, offers a remarkable parallel with quantum physics and the philosophy of Alan Watts.
Yes, absolutely. The Tao Te Ching, traditionally attributed to Laozi, describes the Tao as the source of everything, something undefinable and constantly in motion, permeating all reality without any separation.
Undefinable.
This idea resonates remarkably with the interconnectedness that quantum physics reveals, where entangled particles behave as a unified system, and also with Bohm's theory, which posits the universe as an interconnected hologram. Watts, who was deeply influenced by Taoism, wrote, "The great Tao flows everywhere," suggesting that consciousness, like the Tao, isn't separate from the cosmos, but an intrinsic part of its continuous movement.
And in Taoism, there's that practice of wu wei, right? Action without action, which seems to align with the idea of trusting the flow.
Exactly. The practice of Wu Wei teaches us to flow with the Tao, to trust the natural process of things, without trying to force or control outcomes. This directly echoes the trust that Watts so often preached. The way to become one with the universe is to trust it.
Just it.
In quantum physics, the collapse of the wave function of the double slit experiment can be interpreted in this light of Wu Wei. Consciousness doesn't impose a reality, but rather allows it to emerge spontaneously, much like Watts described decisions arising like hiccups.
Interesting. And what about Taoist meditation experiences? Are there accounts of this unity?
Yes, accounts from Taoist meditators, such as those described by Eva Wong, frequently mention experiences of ego dissolution, where the mind merges with the cosmos, something very reminiscent of the sense of unity suggested by Bohm's implicate order.
Merging with the cosmos.
Taoism also offers a view of reality as something inherently fluid, where opposites like particle and wave aren't mutually exclusive, but complementary, like yin and yang.
Yin and yang.
This perspective aligns with the concept of quantum superposition, where particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously. Watts would argue that consciousness, in observing, participates in this same fluidity, co-creating reality without the need for deliberate control.
So Taoism and quantum physics, though in very different contexts, seem to point towards a fundamentally interconnected and dynamic reality.
Exactly. But how do other spiritual traditions expand on this view? Let's now explore Vedanta, a school of Hindu philosophy that places consciousness at the very center of the universe.
Vedanta, right. One of the major schools of Hindu philosophy, proclaiming a fundamental unity between the Atman, the individual soul, and Brahman, the ultimate and universal reality. This idea of non-duality resonates deeply with the concepts we've been exploring in quantum physics and Watts philosophy.
Yes, absolutely. In the Upanishads, which are foundational texts of Vedanta, consciousness is described as the very essence of the cosmos, the primordial force that projects reality as if it were a divine dream.
A divine dream.
This vision finds a surprising echo in the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation of quantum physics, which suggests that it is the consciousness of the observer that collapses the wave function, bringing reality into manifestation.
Right, that interpretation.
And it also aligns with Bohm's perspective, where mind is seen as an intrinsic part of this cosmic hologram. Watts, with his ecumenical view, would certainly agree, saying something like, the more you trust it as another, the more you realize the inseparable identity of self and other.
And how is this unity experienced in practice within the Vedantic tradition?
Well, Vedanta emphasizes the practice of self-inquiry, the relentless search for the answer to the fundamental question, who am I?
Who am I?
The goal of this practice is to dissolve the illusion of separation, recognizing the essential identity between the individual self and universal consciousness. Meditators who follow this tradition frequently report deep states of samadhi, where consciousness expands and feels an indissoluble union with the cosmos. These experiences of unity are very reminiscent of the interconnectedness that quantum physics reveals, where distant particles act as if they were a single entity.
Are there studies that investigate these meditative states? Brain scans, maybe?
Yes, neuroscience studies, such as those conducted by Andrew Newberg, show that the practice of Vedanic meditations can lead to a significant reduction in activity in the parietal cortex, an area of the brain associated with spatial orientation and the feeling of separation from the world.
Interesting. Less separation activity.
This decrease in brain activity may be related to the subjective experience of unity with the whole, something that aligns with the idea of an interconnected implicate order of Bohm. For Watts, these moments of transcendence would be manifestations of consciousness flowing with the great Tao, co-creating reality through this surrender.
And what about the concept of Maya in Vedanta, the illusion?
Ah, yes. Vedanta also posits that the reality we perceive daily is Maya, a kind of cosmic illusion projected by consciousness itself. This idea aligns with the fluidity that quantum physics presents us with, where reality seems to depend on the act of observation to concretize into a specific form. Watts, with his characteristic sense of humor, might have compared Maya to a grand cosmic game of hide-and-seek, as he suggested by saying, the universe is an endless mystery to itself.
Besides Taoism and Vedanta, are there other spiritual traditions that offer interesting parallels with quantum physics and Watts' philosophy?
Yes, definitely. Buddhism, especially the Mahayana school, presents the concept of emptiness, shunyata, as a remarkable parallel with quantum physics.
Emptiness, shunyata.
The Heart Sutra, a central text of Mahayana Buddhism, teaches that form is emptiness, emptiness is form, suggesting that reality is inherently fluid and interdependent, very similar to the idea of quantum superposition. In Buddhist philosophy, consciousness is not seen as a fixed and independent entity, but as a dynamic process that arises in mutual dependence with all other phenomena, which echoes the interconnectedness revealed by quantum entanglement.
And what about Buddhist meditative practices, like Zen?
Well, Zen meditators, as described by D.T. Suzuki, frequently report experiences of satori, moments of sudden enlightenment, where the rigid separation between the self and the world dissolves, providing a sense of unity reminiscent of the interconnectedness proposed by Bohm.
Satori.
Watts, who had great admiration for Zen Buddhism, would likely say that these experiences reflect a deep trust in the flow of life. The principle is that anytime you voluntarily let up control, you have an excess of power.
And Christian mysticism, does that fit in?
Yes, Christian mysticism, with prominent figures like Meister Eckhart, also speaks of an essential union between the individual soul and the divine. Eckhart described the soul as a spark of the very divinity, intrinsically united with God in an indivisible totality.
A spark of divinity.
This vision resonates with the idea of Bohm's implicate order, where individual consciousness is seen as an inseparable part of the cosmic hologram. Contemplative practices such as stentoring prayer seek to lead to states of profound union and fusion with the divine, something that Watts might compare to that essential surrender to the flow. I don't know is the same thing as I love.
Wow.
All these parallels suggest that consciousness, by transcending the limitations of the individual ego, actively participates in the co-creation of reality, a concept that finds an intriguing echo in the discoveries of quantum physics.
Alan Watts, with his brilliant mind and his eclectic approach, seemed to see all these spiritual traditions as different expressions of the same fundamental truth, of that same universal flow.
Exactly, he wrote, the great Tao flows everywhere, seeking to unify Taoism, Vedanta, Buddhism, and Christian mysticism into a comprehensive vision where consciousness plays an active role in the co-creation of reality by flowing in harmony with the cosmos. For Watts, quantum physics would be like a scientific rediscovery of this primordial flow, with phenomena like the double slit experiment and entanglement serving as evidence that mind and reality are not separate entities, but interconnected aspects of the same totality. His emphasis on trust, the way to become one with the universe is to trust it, is a central theme that permeates all these diverse spiritual practices. In Taoism, it manifests as Wu Wei, in Vedanta, through self-inquiry, and in Buddhism, through meditation on emptiness.
And all these spiritual traditions also emphasize the transformative potential of our consciousness, don't they?
Yes. Taoist meditators frequently report an increased sense of harmony with nature. Vedantic practitioners describe a profound sense of cosmic purpose, and Buddhists cultivate an ever greater compassion for all beings. These accounts echo Watts' idea of synergy. Synergy is the intelligence of a highly complex system.
Synergy.
Consciousness, in shaping reality, also operates a profound transformation within the individual, as Watts poetically expressed. The more you give it away, the more it comes back.
That's beautiful.
But if spirituality seems to consistently point to consciousness as a co-creative force, what does modern science have to say about this? To answer that question, we need to delve into the various interpretations of quantum physics that attempt to shed light on the role of consciousness, always keeping alive this sense of mystery that permeates our exploration.
Okay, so quantum physics presents us with this surprising possibility. Could consciousness be the fundamental force that shapes reality? The double slit experiment suggests that observation has a direct impact on the behavior of particles, and David Bohm's theory proposes a holographic universe where mind is an intrinsic part of this interconnected whole. But what has modern science actually established about the role of consciousness in this intricate cosmic game?
Well, Alan Watts, with his characteristic insight, reminds us that the data for a decision in any given situation is infinite, suggesting that science offers us valuable narratives, but not necessarily the ultimate truth.
Right, narratives, not final answers.
For him, consciousness is an inseparable aspect of the universal flow, co-creating reality by harmonizing with the great Tao.
So where do we go from here, scientifically?
Exactly. In this section, we'll delve into the various scientific interpretations that seek to unravel the relationship between consciousness and the quantum world. We'll begin with the intriguing vision of von Neumann-Wigner, which places the mind at the very center of the collapse of the wave function.
Okay.
Next, we'll examine some experiments that attempt to test the impact of conscious intention on physical reality.
Conscious intention.
We'll also consider the more skeptical perspectives, which view consciousness as a mere byproduct of brain activity, incapable of influencing quantum events. Throughout this exploration, we'll keep as a backdrop the radical trust that Watts proposed.
Right.
Does consciousness truly have the power to create reality, as some interpretations of quantum physics suggest? Or is it just a player in an intricate cosmic flow? Let's investigate the evidence, the theories, and the mystery that persists, always asking ourselves, are we active co-creators of the universe, or just dancers in its subtle music.
One of the most thought-provoking interpretations of quantum physics is that of von Neumann-Wigner, which places consciousness center stage when it comes to the collapse of the wave function.
Yes, developed by John von Neumann and Eugene Wigner back in the 1930s, this perspective argues that in that famous double-slit experiment, superposition, that coexistence of multiple possible states for a particle, only resolves into a definite state at the exact moment a conscious mind makes an observation.
Only when consciousness observes it.
According to this view, yes. Without the presence of consciousness, reality would remain in a state of indefinite probability, like a dream that isn't being dreamt by anyone. This idea, known as the consciousness interpretation, implies that the mind isn't just a passive spectator of the universe, but an active agent in the very creation of the reality we perceive.
It's a powerful vision. And how might Alan Watts have viewed this idea that consciousness plays such a central role?
Well, this perspective resonates interestingly with Watts' philosophy, which saw consciousness as an intrinsic part of the universal flow. He wrote, "The way to become one with the universe is to trust it." Trust. For Watts, the collapse of the wave function wouldn't be an act of deliberate control by the mind, but a spontaneous and natural expression of the cosmos itself, as he poetically suggested. You don't know where your decisions come from, they pop up like hiccups.
Well, hiccups, right.
The von Neumann-Wigner interpretation also finds an echo in Bohm's theory, where consciousness is seen as a fundamental part of this cosmic hologram, actively participating in the unfolding of the implicate order into manifest reality.
But is this the only interpretation of quantum physics regarding the role of consciousness? It can't be, right?
Absolutely not. There are other interpretations, such as the influential Copenhagen interpretation, which tends to minimize the role of consciousness, attributing the collapse of the wave function to physical interactions, like measurement by an apparatus, rather than a conscious observer.
Okay, so the measurement itself, not the mind behind it.
That's the Copenhagen view, broadly. And then we also have Hugh Everett's intriguing many worlds interpretation.
Ah, many worlds.
Which proposes that every act of observation doesn't collapse reality into a single state, but rather branches the universe into multiple parallel universes where all quantum possibilities are realized.
Mind-bending.
In this view, consciousness doesn't collapse reality, but rather navigates between these various branches.
It's an idea that truly expands our minds. What might Watts have said about these different interpretations? Seems like he wouldn't pick just one.
Probably not. With his characteristic sense of humor, Watts would probably say something like, "You make a snap judgment," suggesting that all these interpretations are ultimately human narratives trying to capture the ultimate nature of reality, which remains a profound mystery.
Right, the mystery again.
But before we delve into the experimental evidence, we need to ask ourselves, what has modern science actually discovered about the potential impact of consciousness on the quantum world?
Okay, so are there actual studies that attempt to test this idea that our consciousness can actually influence the quantum world?
Yes, some researchers, like Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, have dedicated themselves to experimentally investigating the possibility of consciousness interacting with quantum systems.
Radin, okay.
In a study published back in 2005, Radin examined whether human intention could affect the interference pattern in the classic double-slit experiment. Participants were instructed to mentally focus on one of the slits, trying to influence the behavior of the electrons.
What happened?
The results apparently showed a small, but statistically significant, alteration in the observed wave pattern. Now, while these results are controversial and definitely require further replication, they suggest that consciousness may have a subtle interaction with the quantum world, which would align with the perspective of von Neumann-Wigner.
Interesting. Small but significant. And have there been other experiments along these lines?
Yes. Going back further, Helmut Schmidt conducted experiments in the 1970s investigating the influence of intention on random number generators based on quantum processes like radioactive decay.
Random number generators.
Participants tried to wish for specific outcomes, such as a greater occurrence of even numbers. The results obtained showed deviations from chance with statistical significance, again suggesting a possible influence of mind on quantum processes.
Wow.
These studies, though conducted on a small scale and also subject to debate, are intriguing and echo Watts' idea that the more you let go, the more you realize. For him, this influence of intention wouldn't be an act of forced control, but an alignment with the universal flow, similar to the Taoist concept of wu-wei.
What about more recent research? Anything new?
Well, more recent research, some published around 2018, explored the effects of meditation on quantum systems. Experienced meditators, when entering deep states of unity and focus, demonstrated a subtle ability to influence quantum detectors, suggesting that altered states of consciousness may have an interaction with reality at a fundamental level.
Meditators influencing detectors.
Again, while these results are still preliminary and require much further investigation, they align with Bohm's view, where consciousness is seen as an integral part of the cosmic hologram.
But not everyone in the scientific community agrees with these interpretations, right? There must be pushback. What's the perspective of the skeptics?
Oh, absolutely. Skeptics argue that consciousness plays no special or necessary role in quantum physics. The Copenhagen interpretation, which is still the most widely accepted among physicists, posits that the collapse of the wave function occurs due to physical interactions, the measurement apparatus, and not by the intervention of a conscious mind.
So the machine does it, not the person looking at the machine.
That's the argument. Critics like Victor Stenger argue that the consciousness interpretation lacks solid empirical evidence and represents more of a mystical reading of quantum physics than a robust scientific explanation.
A mystical reading.
For these skeptics, consciousness would be an epiphenomena, just a byproduct of brain activity, without the capacity to influence events occurring at the fundamental quantum level.
And how do they explain the results of experiments, like radons or Schmidt's, that seem to show an influence of intention?
Skeptics generally point to the methodological limitations of these studies, the difficulty of independent replication, and the possibility of experimental biases or statistical errors.
Okay, methodological issues.
They argue that neuroscience offers explanations for the subjective experiences of unity or intention, such as the activation of certain brain areas during meditation, without needing to invoke quantum physics. For example, fMRI studies show that meditation can modulate activity in brain regions like the prefrontal cortex and parietal lobe, creating states of transcendence, but without direct evidence of an impact on the external quantum world.
So brain changes, yes. Reality changes, no.
That's the skeptical view. These objections suggest that consciousness would be, at best, a passive observer of quantum events and not an active co-creator of reality.
So there's a clear tension between these different perspectives, a real debate. How might Alan Watts, with his vision that sought to integrate science and spirituality, have dealt with this divergence?
Well, for Watts, science was a powerful and valuable tool, but also inherently limited in its ability to capture the totality and depth of the cosmos. He wrote, "You make a snap judgment."
Right.
Applied to the context of quantum physics, this suggests that the various interpretations, whether it's von Neumann-Wigner emphasizing consciousness or Copenhagen minimizing it, are ultimately maps of reality, and not reality itself.
Maps, not the territory.
Exactly. Consciousness, for Watts, operates in an intrinsic synergy with the universe. Synergy is the intelligence of a highly complex system. Experiments like those conducted by radon, which seem to indicate an influence of intention on quantum reality, would be, for Watts, signs that the mind is fundamentally connected and flowing with the cosmos, much like the Taoist concept of wu-wei.
And he saw this rigid separation between the physical and the spiritual as problematic, didn't he? Like mind versus matter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Watts would argue that this categorical distinction between brain and cosmic consciousness is ultimately illusory, as everything is part of this same great Tao, this indivisible universal flow.
The Tao again.
The skeptical critique, which tends to limit consciousness to the neuronal activity of the brain, would be seen by Watts as yet another manifestation of our Western need for control and categorization, something he criticized in his parable of the overworked laborer.
The need to pin it down.
Instead, he proposed an attitude of surrender and trust. The principle is that anytime you voluntarily let up control, you have an access of power. Meditators who demonstrate a subtle ability to influence quantum detectors might be achieving this precisely by letting go of the ego's grip and aligning themselves with this broader cosmic flow.
So, for Watts, science and mystery wouldn't be opposing forces, but complementary aspects of our search to understand the nature of reality.
Exactly. And this perspective prepares us for the next stage of our exploration. How can we perhaps apply this trust that Watts so often preached to, maybe shape our own reality in more conscious and intentional ways?
Right.
If science offers us some intriguing clues, but not definitive answers, perhaps the practice of meditation, inspired by these spiritual traditions we've explored, can reveal even more about this mysterious relationship between consciousness and the universe.
Okay, so quantum physics presents us with this surprising idea that consciousness can shape reality, with the double slit experiment being a classic example of how the mind seems to influence the behavior of particles. But how can we access this co-creative potential in our daily lives? Is it possible?
Well, Alan Watts, with his profound wisdom and his view that the way to become one with the universe is to trust it, points us towards the importance of surrender, a letting go that aligns our consciousness with the universal flow.
Surrender, not control.
Inspired by traditions like Taoism and Vedanta, Watts invites us to flow with the cosmos, where trust, not control, is the key to this co-creation. Exactly. In this section, we'll explore some meditative practices that resonate with this trust that Watts so valued. From the Taoist approach of wu-wei, effortless action, to the profound self-inquiry of Vedanta, all these practices aim to dissolve the barriers of the ego and allow our consciousness to align with the great Tao.
Align with the flow.
These practices not only promote a deep sense of inner peace, but may also, as some research suggests, influence external reality in subtle ways, reflecting the synergy that Watts describes so well. Synergy is the intelligence of a highly complex system.
So with trust and practice, could it be possible to co-create our reality in a more conscious way?
That's the promise we'll be investigating. Prepare for a practical guide that combines the wisdom of spirituality with the intriguing suggestions of quantum science, always asking ourselves, how does our consciousness shape the world when we learn to flow in harmony with the universe?
Taoism, with its deep reverence for the Tao as the universal flow of existence, offers us a very powerful meditative practice known as zhuoang, which can be translated as sitting and forgetting.
Exactly. Sitting and forgetting. This technique, described in classic texts like the Zhuangzi, involves a state of deep relaxation, where the practitioner strives to abandon thoughts, desires, and any attempt at control, allowing the mind to merge spontaneously with the cosmos.
Merging.
Watts, who was deeply influenced by Taoism, would certainly see zhuoang as a practical expression of his philosophy of the way to become one with the universe is to trust it. By loosening the grip of the ego and trusting the flow, our consciousness aligns with this universal movement, which could potentially influence reality in subtle ways, as suggested by some quantum studies on intention.
And how is zhuoang practiced? How does one sit and forget?
Well, to practice zhuoang, you find a quiet space where you won't be interrupted and sit comfortably with your spine straight. Close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, and simply observe the thoughts that arise in your mind without clinging to them as if they were passing clouds in the sky.
Just watch them go by.
Don't try to force silence, just trust. As Watts reminded us, you don't know where your decisions come from, they pop up like hiccups. Let the silence emerge if it does.
Okay.
Neuroscience studies show that the practice of Taoist meditations can lead to an increase in brainwave coherence and a reduction in activity in the parietal cortex, creating states of unity that resemble the implications of Bohm's implicate order. Meditators who regularly practice zhuoang often report sensations of expanded consciousness, as if they are actively co-creating reality by flowing in harmony with the Tao.
So this practice aligns with the idea that consciousness collapses reality without the need for deliberate effort, just by being in that state.
That's the implication, yes, exactly. Watts would say that zhuoang is an example of wu-wei action without action that allows the mind to participate more fully in this cosmic hologram. But there are other meditative approaches that complement this view and that can also help us explore this connection between our consciousness and reality.
Okay, like Vedanta.
Let's turn to the practices of Vedanta now.
Vedanta, right, with its fundamental assertion that Atman, our individual essence, is identical to Brahman, the ultimate and universal reality. It offers a profound meditative practice known as self-inquiry.
Yes, self-inquiry. This practice, taught by great masters like Ramana Maharshi, takes as its starting point the simple but deeply transformative question, who am I?
Who am I?
The practitioner is invited to attentively observe the thoughts, sensations, and emotions that arise, gradually realizing that they are not their physical body, nor their thinking mind, nor their fleeting emotions, but rather the pure consciousness that lies behind all these experiences.
The witness.
In a sense, yes. Watts, with his vision of unity, would certainly echo this practice by saying, the more you trust it as another, the more you realize the inseparable identity of self and other. This practice has the potential to align our consciousness with the totality of the universe, which, from the perspective of quantum physics, could influence reality at a fundamental level.
And how is self-inquiry practiced? Just keep asking, who am I?
Essentially, yes. To practice self-inquiry, find a quiet place where you can sit in silence. Close your eyes and begin to ask yourself the question, who am I? When thoughts arise in your mind, Simply observe who is aware of these thoughts and gently return to the original question.
Gently return.
Don't seek logical or intellectual answers. Just allow your mind to rest in this investigation of consciousness itself. Studies by Andrew Newberg show that Vedantic meditations can lead to an activation of the prefrontal cortex and a reduction of activity in the parietal lobe, creating states of deep unity that resemble the quantum interconnectedness we've been exploring.
So similar brain effects to Taoist practice.
Similar areas involved in modulating that sense of self and unity, yes. Accounts from experienced meditators, like those in Ramana Maharshi's Be As You Are, frequently describe sensations of merging with the cosmos, suggesting that consciousness, when freed from the limitations of the ego, can actively participate in the co-creation of reality.
So self-inquiry would be a way to connect directly with that fundamental consciousness that quantum physics seems to suggest.
That's the idea, yes. Exactly. And although self-inquiry may seem like a passive process, Watts would argue that it prepares us to flow with the universe in a more conscious and intentional way.
But what makes these meditative practices truly effective in this process of co-creation? You mentioned trust earlier.
Trust seems to be the link that unites these meditative practices, doesn't it?
It really does seem central.
Yes. Watts wrote, "The principle is that any time you voluntarily let up control, you have an access of power." In meditation, trying to force a state of unity or control the flow of thoughts usually creates resistance and frustration, just as he illustrated in the parable of the overworked laborer.
Trying too hard backfires.
Instead, the key seems to lie in trusting the process, the inherent intelligence of our own nervous system, the wisdom of the cosmos, the flow of the great Tao, allowing our consciousness to flow freely. This surrender, this trust, is what potentially opens us to the possibility of shaping reality in subtle ways, as suggested by some of the experiments conducted by Dean Radin.
So this trust is both a practical attitude and a spiritual posture.
Exactly. In Zhuang, the practitioner trusts in the silence that emerges naturally. In self-inquiry, they trust in the very nature of pure consciousness. Watts would connect this trust to his vision of synergy. Synergy is the intelligence of a highly complex system.
Synergy?
Consciousness, when entering deep meditative states, participates more fully in Bohm's cosmic hologram, where every intention, however subtle, resonates with the totality. Many meditators report significant changes in their lives, an increase in mental clarity, the emergence of meaningful coincidences that echo this idea of quantum co-creation.
Synchronicity.
You could call it that. Watts poetically expressed this idea by saying, "The more you give it away, the more it comes back," suggesting that surrender and trust don't diminish our power, but rather amplify it.
For those who wish to begin exploring these practices, maybe someone listening right now, what would be a good starting point following Watts' guidance? Can you give a sort of combined approach?
Sure. For those who feel inspired to experiment with these practices and explore their potential for co-creating reality, here is a simple guide that combines elements of Taoist Zhuang and Vedantic self-inquiry, always keeping the trust that Watts so valued as a foundation.
Okay.
First, preparation. Choose a quiet place where you won't be interrupted. Sit comfortably with your spine straight, or if you prefer, lie down. Set a gentle intention for your practice, maybe something like, "I want to flow with the universe and explore the nature of my own consciousness."
Gentle intention.
Then, relaxation. Close your eyes and breathe deeply, maybe counting to 5 as you inhale and to 5 as you exhale. Allow your body to relax completely, remembering Watts' words. Let's see what you're going to do. Just let go. Dedicate about 5 minutes to this initial phase, allowing thoughts to arise and pass without you clinging to them.
Let them pass like clouds.
Exactly. Then maybe try some Taoist meditation, Zhuang. For the next 10 minutes, simply observe the thoughts that arise in your mind, as if they were clouds passing in the sky. Don't try to control the flow of thoughts. Just trust in the silence that resides behind them, even if your mind seems agitated. Feel yourself as an integral part of this universal flow, this great Tao.
10 minutes of that.
Then perhaps Vedantic meditation, self-inquiry. Dedicate the following 10 minutes to the practice of self-inquiry. Ask yourself the question, who am I? Observe who is aware of the thoughts and gently return to the original question. Don't seek intellectual answers, just trust in your own consciousness, remembering Watts' philosophy. The way to become one with the universe is to trust it.
Another 10 minutes.
And finally, integration and safety. After the meditation, take a moment to record your experiences in a journal, even if they seem subtle. Be patient with yourself and practice regularly, maybe dedicating about 20 minutes a day total to these practices. It's important to avoid forcing results and, of course, consult a mental health professional if you have a history of psychological disorders.
Good advice.
This guide is really just a gentle invitation to begin flowing with the cosmos in the way that Watts so eloquently taught. These practices prepare us for the conclusion of our journey, where we will unite the insights of science, the wisdom of spirituality, and the transformative vision of Alan Watts to try and answer the fundamental question: what does it truly mean to co-create our reality?
Our profound journey through quantum physics and the philosophy of Alan Watts has led us to a fascinating mystery. Could consciousness truly shape reality, as the strange findings of the double-slit experiment and the intriguing theory of David Bohm's cosmic hologram suggest? Alan Watts, with his unwavering trust in the universal flow, has been our guide in this exploration, constantly reminding us the way to become one with the universe is to trust it.
Such a key phrase.
From the interconnectedness revealed by quantum entanglement to the ancient meditative practices of Taoism and Vedanta, we've investigated how the mind might be an active co-creator of the cosmos, not through forceful control, but through harmonious surrender to the great Tao.
That's surrender.
The central question that has accompanied us, does consciousness create reality, may not have a definitive answer, but it has invited us to embrace the mystery with an open mind and a trusting heart.
Exactly. This conclusion seeks to bring together the various threads of our exploration, uniting the insights of science, the wisdom of spirituality, and the unique perspective of Watts, to demonstrate that co-creating reality is, ultimately, an act of profound cosmic trust.
Yeah.
If you've stayed with us to this point, congratulations on navigating the waters of the unknown with the curiosity of a mystic and the openness of a scientist. Now, prepare to reflect on the discoveries we've made together, to apply Watts' wisdom to your own life, and to accept a final challenge that seeks to connect your personal story with the vast flow of the cosmos. What is your consciousness co-creating in this very moment?
Alan Watts' philosophy remains such a powerful beacon to help us navigate the mystery of consciousness and reality. His emphasis on trusting the universe, expressed in that striking phrase, "the way to become one with the universe is to trust it," finds a surprising echo in the discoveries of quantum physics, where consciousness itself seems to have the capacity to collapse reality, as demonstrated in the double-slit experiment.
It really does.
For Watts, this act of observation wouldn't be a deliberate effort of the mind, but a spontaneous and natural expression of the cosmos itself, as he poetically suggested. You don't know where your decisions come from, they pop up like hiccups.
Right.
The fundamental interconnectedness revealed by quantum entanglement and Bohm's theory of the cosmic hologram also resonate deeply with his vision of essential unity. The more you trust it as another, the more you realize the inseparable identity of self and other.
Exactly. Watts also taught us the importance of embracing mystery rather than trying to reduce it to simplistic explanations. He wrote, "The universe is an endless mystery to itself."
Endless mystery.
For him, the uncertainties and paradoxes we encounter in quantum science wouldn't be obstacles to overcome, but rather opportunities to say, "I don't know," and find a deeper form of love and acceptance in the face of the unknown, as he proposed. "I don't know" is the same thing as "I love."
That's profound.
His legacy is a permanent invitation to flow with the cosmos, trusting that our consciousness actively participates in the co-creation of reality by harmonizing with the inherent intelligence of the universe, with that fundamental cosmic synergy he described as. Synergy is the intelligence of a highly complex system. Whether through the practice of meditation, the attentive observation of the quantum world, or simply living our daily lives, Watts reminds us that we are the universe itself in action, co-creating it every instant.
And how can we truly bring this cosmic trust of Watts into our daily lives, using our consciousness more intentionally, perhaps, to shape our own reality, practically speaking?
Well, the answer lies in simple practices that echo his philosophy and the meditations we explored throughout this journey. Begin by incorporating daily meditation into your routine, inspired by the Taoist practice of Zhuang.
Zhuang, sitting and forgetting.
Set aside just 10 minutes to sit in silence, observing the thoughts that arise without trying to control them, remembering Watts' words. Let's see what you're going to do.
Studies suggest that this practice can lead to a reduction in activity in the parietal lobe, creating states of unity that can, in turn, amplify the power of your intention, as demonstrated in some of Dean Radin's experiments.
And Vedantic self-inquiry can also be a powerful tool, can't it? That, who am I?
Exactly. Dedicate a few minutes of your day to asking yourself the fundamental question, who am I? Observe the consciousness that lies behind your thoughts and gently return to the question. This practice has the potential to dissolve the barriers of the ego, aligning your mind with the cosmic flow, where, as Watts poetically expressed, the more you give it away, the more it comes back.
Give it away. Outside of formal meditation, try to apply this same attitude of trust in your daily life. When faced with important decisions or unexpected challenges, ask yourself, how can I flow with this situation? This mindset, which Watts called a practical utopia, has the power to transform anxiety into curiosity, which in turn can subtly influence your reality, resonating with the quantum effects of intention we discussed.
And a simple practice like keeping a journal of intentions can also be helpful, like writing things down.
Without a doubt. Before going to sleep, take a few minutes to write down a positive intention you wish to cultivate, such as promoting inner peace or attracting new opportunities into your life, and then trust the process. Let it go. Many meditation practitioners report that focusing on specific intentions can lead to the emergence of meaningful coincidences, echoing this idea of quantum co-creation we've been exploring.
Right.
Watts would say that these practices help us connect with the infinite interior of the spirit, allowing our consciousness to shape reality with trust and intention.
If this deep dive into consciousness and reality resonated with you, if it sparked new ways of thinking about your place in the cosmos, then take a moment to engage. Your likes and comments not only support this exploration, but also help others who are curious about these very questions find their way to this conversation.
Yes, please do.
Share this deep dive with anyone who might find it intriguing. Let's build a community exploring these fascinating intersections together.
Now, 2 more pathways into understanding and exploration await you on the screen. Click on the one that calls to you to continue your journey into the depths of knowledge and insight.